Welcome back to another episode of the D-League. Today, Bilal and I will be talking about fighting games in episode 19. And, concerning fighting games, a genre that was really big in the 90s thanks to Street Fighter 2, but has kind of fallen off in recent years or like in the 2000s, and now it's back becoming an esport with games like Street Fighter 5 and Guilty Gear Xrd. What is a fighting game or a classic fighting game? It's pretty much most of the time one-on-one, so one player against another player. Directly, you have one screen that shows you all the information. You see your characters, you see your health bar if it's a classic fighting game. You have health bar and a timer. Maybe you have something like a super meter or a special meter. And, you have your characters on a stage where you move around in 2D or 3D environments. So that, and the goal is pretty much to take away the opponent's health bar by hitting him, or just having the life lead by the time the timer runs out. So let's say you have 30% life and the opponent has 15% life, and the timer runs out, then you win the round. And it's mostly like best of 3 rounds or best of 5 rounds, depending on the game. So it's not like one match is just one round, but you have multiple rounds for something like meter management. So if you gain special meter, then in the next round you are still able to use it. So you have to think about not only how to play your character or how to play the opponent, but there's also deeper strategy or meter management involved. So like using your resources very efficiently. And because everything is pretty much on one screen, you would think, wow, that sounds really simple, right? I press attack buttons or do special moves and I win like that. But I think we're gonna get deeper into that in a moment. Mm-hmm. Bilal, you don't have much experience with fighting games, right?
Yeah, that's correct. I'd say. Go ahead.
What do you think? Like, how do you imagine a fighting game being played? Kind of.
Okay. So I don't have no experience. So I've played them, so I understand like how. At least, I have a vague, like, kind of surface knowledge of how you're supposed to be good at them. But I'd say my experience with, like, fighting games at the beginning was kind of like going to an arcade and then, spamming buttons and then winning. And then if you consider Smash a fighting game, then that's, like, where my main experience is. So it's kind of different from the real, like, the more traditional fighting games. And then after that, I kind of only really played some of Tekken for Wii U, so and that was more recent as I was like more of an adult and more understand that you can actually be good at games and not just spam buttons. So it's like I kind of have less than a year of gameplay of the traditional types of fighting games. So like I understand, I guess, with a fighting game you want to know what a fighting game kind of looks like, I guess, is knowing your combos is kind of a basic, and then with your combos you want to be able to, I guess, muscle memorize what to do, so one player can expect the other player to do something and retaliate based on, I don't know, whatever combo he finds to be the best one in that situation, until the other guy's dead or, like you said, if there's a timer when that happens. So it's kind of, I think, about outplaying the other guy with your game knowledge and skill, I guess, mechanical skill.
Yep, that's pretty much it. It's a lot of like when you talk to fighting game players, I've been playing the genre for well, I'm active in the German community for 11 years now, but kind of playing really active for, let's say, like 7 or 8 years. And if you talk to people, then they say, yeah, fighting games, they are all about mind games, where do you press a button, or will you not press a button, for example? So if you are in range for an attack, then just maybe just your heart attack would hit, but you press the light attack to make the opponent think you are going to hit him, stuff like that. You kind of want to trick the other guy into thinking, yeah, you're going to do that, but then you surprise him by doing something different. And yeah, so like even in older games, I mean, most people probably know fighting games from Street Fighter 2, if they are a bit older. I guess your generation might not have grown up with Street Fighter 2. Maybe something like Tekken for PlayStation 1 or something. Or, well, you had arcades in Germany by the time I was old enough to play video games. They were already kind of banned. It restricted it to age 18 because it's seen as gambling in Germany. So yeah, we didn't have any arcades. So yeah, I guess in Germany, most fighting game players know it from going on vacation and playing there at a cabinet or from consoles, pretty much. And so like when you go all the way back, you have stuff like Absolute Karate or Karate Champion, where both players play the same character, and it's more like a martial art tournament. And then you had even Street Fighter 1. Everyone thinks Street Fighter 2 is kind of like the first Street Fighter game, which it's not, because it's Street Fighter 2, of course. And in the first game, you could only play Ryu and Ken. So both had the same moves, and you couldn't select a different character. So it was kind of the same thing as those karate games. But then with Street Fighter 2, they introduced 8 completely different characters. Well, except for Ryu and Ken, they were completely the same. But then you had like Guile and Dalsim and Blanca, and they played differently. So that was kind of like the turning point for the fighting game genre, where the genre became really popular in the arcades. And because it was just so interesting to play, because players play the character differently, and the characters are different on their own. So there's a lot of let's say like space where you can express yourself as a player, I think. And so Street Fighter 2 boomed, and then you had a huge wave of other companies trying to get into the fighting game market, because it was so big, especially in Japan and the US. So you had companies like Data East. The some Street Fighter 2 developers switched companies, for example, to SNK, or later on Arika. You had Namco that made Tekken and in mid 90s. So then you had a lot of smaller, maybe lesser known development studios. I guess Technos is kind of known for Double Dragon, but maybe not many people played the Double Dragon fighting game, for example. And anyway, the market was flooded with fighting games. And then by the end of the 90s, it kind of imploded, that you had so many fighting games, and yeah, kind of the you only had the hardcore guys left playing fighting games. Arcades were in decline because of the internet, at least outside of Japan. Japan still has a, well, not huge arcade scene, but you still have game centers in the big cities, and even in like vacation spots and so on. Which is very different from, I guess, Europe, and even in the US. I know a lot of arcades closed down, and so yeah, then you had kind of a depression in the early 2000s where, for example, Capcom didn't really develop new fighting games much. So you had smaller studios come in and release games. For example, Arc System Works Guilty Gear series started on the PlayStation 1, and then they made a sequel, and they got into the arcade market. And now today, for example, Arc System Works is probably one of the most successful fighting game studios, as they release worldwide and sell pretty well. They had a world tour, and so yeah, like, you had the depression, and now the genre is kind of back from its sleep, because starting in 2009, pretty much with Street Fighter 4, I know other games had online gameplay, online functionality as well, but with like the PS3 and Xbox 360 era, fighting games got net play, and that way the genre kind of came back, because, for example, I grew up in a small town where I didn't have anyone that played fighting games, and so it was pretty much sitting in your room practicing combos, especially if you are not very experienced in the genre. You just sit around, you practice combos, and you think you are the hot shit in fighting games. Like, the genre is really good and at making you think you can do stuff, but you actually can't. So then people got the ability to play with people in their own country, or like maybe all of Europe, for example, as a scale. Even now, 8 years later, it's still a problem. Like, you can have a bad connection with, like, for me, with some guy in Poland, but another Polish player, it's fine, and it works well with the French player, but it won't work well with another French player. So it's really like the fighting game genre. It's so picky concerning like the network connection, that I think you can play online, but for example, online tournaments are not taken seriously because of the extra delay. And if you have one guy with a terrible connection and you got to play him in the bracket, then it's pretty much a coin toss. No matter how good you are, maybe you can like try to play around it a bit, but like we talked about, fighting games being about reactions, making somebody think you are going to do something, and mind games. But if there's a huge delay, and you cannot trust kind of the information that you are seeing, you have to press attacks, well, and just hope you win, like the trades, or you press the button earlier due to the bad connection. So even today, I think like fighting games as a genre for a player is, if you take it seriously, then it's an offline genre. You need to go to offline meetings or offline tournaments to actually see how good you are, or to have an environment where everyone can play to his or her best capabilities.
Yeah, I think the delay problem might be a reason for kind of gaming cafes or places like that to be bigger again. But in essence, they're arcades, but with different machines. Like for example, places with Steam accounts might with lots of machines that have Steam accounts on them might like start showing up even faster because of just because of lag. It's annoying because you can be a good player, but then the difference of delay can like really mess you up. But that's just something that I thought about because you mentioned all that delay. So yeah.
Exactly. I mean, in Germany, like gaming cafes are not very big.
Mm-hmm.
So like meetings are mostly at somebody's apartment, or somebody renting a location and then people meeting up there. And you cannot kind of compare it to America, where the genre is much bigger today. In Germany, it's still very niche. I guess in Europe, in general, it's very niche because it's like it's back to the computer now. Like people prefer to play on PC again.
Mm-hmm.
And fighting games are a console genre because most games come from Japan. And in Japan, the computer is not very popular. So, for example, if you want to play a game, then a specific game, then maybe with like Street Fighter V was released on console and PC at the same time, but other games, especially if they have like a contract with Sony, you have to wait for half a year or for a whole year or maybe 2 years until you can actually play it. So yeah, it's pretty much you if you take the genre seriously, then you need to have a console to play on. And yeah, that might be a turn off for some people as well. And yeah, so that's pretty much kind of the the let's say the hardware environment today for the genre. And well, some concerning controllers, we were talking about input methods, like controllers that people use, and we had like keyboard and mouse and gamepad and stuff. But for fighting games, you have some very good pad players, but I guess most players play on arcade sticks. If you've seen an arcade cabinet, then you probably know how it looks like. It's pretty much a lever to input the directions. So you have up, down, left, right, and then of course the diagonals. And well, on console you have 8 face buttons most of the time. So you have the for example, for PlayStation, you have square, triangle, X, and circle, and then R1, R2, L1, L2. Because even if the game only uses 6 buttons to play, then in, for example, the practice mode, they often have a recording and a play function. So, like, you can record attacks with the other character and then play them back to practice blocking it or counterattacking, stuff like that. And yeah, so most people use a arcade stick because you need. For example, I got blisters from playing on a gamepad because you move around your thumb so much, and that you get blisters from the heat or just from rubbing the rubber. And yeah, so with a arcade stick, you move the lever with your whole hand, so it's much more comfortable.
Yeah.
I know some people might not be able to play with it, maybe because of their wrists or something. So of course, yeah, well then, tough luck. But I think that's also something important about the genre. It's more, it gives you that special feel when playing on an arcade stick.
Yeah, I also, I mean, yeah, the arcade stick obviously looks more effective to me because actually one thing I can't remember, it was a couple months ago, but when I was playing Tekken for Wii U, the gamepad, it's like I remember that pressing the D-pad combos was irritating to do, because if you wanted to press like two buttons and like move a direction and use the D-pad at the same time or something weird like that, it's kind of difficult because obviously your thumb is like not a circle, so when you press two buttons at once, like you might hit one before the other, which I found like kind of annoying. Rather than if you were to have like an arcade stick with say four buttons, kind of all uniformly spaced out, like made for a fighting game, then I find it like a lot easier to actually press the buttons. At least in comparison, if you compare the arcade machines to playing on say an Xbox. Personally, I find the arcade one a lot more easy to control in terms of a fighting game. Yeah, I don't know, just because they seem, because obviously they're made for it. So,
well, when using a pad, if you have a game like Tekken, where, for example, if you need to press square and circle, which are, well, difficult to hit at the same time, I guess most players use shortcuts on the R and L buttons. It's the same for games like Guilty Gear, where you can cancel attacks for like special meter, but you need to press three buttons at the same time, and yeah, so you have to either like hold the pad like a claw, like you would press on, like you're pressing keys on the keyboard, for example, so something like that, or you bind that function to one of the shoulder buttons, if it's allowed. Sometimes it's banned, so yeah. Another thing that some people use is a hitbox, or it's called a hitbox. It's pretty much an arcade stick, but instead of having a lever, you have 4 buttons. So for up, down, left, right, to press. So you have the arcade stick button layout for the attack buttons. But then you have 4 extra buttons for the directions, pretty much, instead of the lever.
Okay.
And like the lever has some like a dead zone where if you move from right to left, because you need to move the ball top a few centimeters, so it takes a bit longer than just pushing down on another button. Like if you take your keyboard and you have a direction bound to WASD, then you have your fingers next to or on 3 directions at the same time. Then you just need to press down like the middle finger, or like maybe your thumb or your pinky or whatever. and then you press that direction, right? And it's pretty much the same thing. It's pretty much like playing on a keyboard, but with arcade buttons.
Yeah.
Uh,
They're kind of like more
So-
appropriately spaced out, I think.
yeah, like more like a natural hand layout. Let's say, like you have the thumb on the bottom, and then you have your, what is it, like the pointing finger
Index.
a bit higher, and so you have like a circle, not the circle, like an angle. Like the buttons are not lined up like the arrow keys on the keyboard, but more like an angle to press them.
Yeah, they're like a diamond, right? Excuse me.
What?
Like they like shaped like a diamond, right? So one at the top, bottom, and left and right. Or something like
You
that.
can do that, but it's more like a wave, I think.
Yeah, like sometimes a rhombus, sometimes a diamond. I think, right? Kind of like a tilted square.
Yeah. Yeah, or something completely different. I mean, you can build you can, if you build your own hitbox, then you can just, or your own controller. That's actually possible. You can just use whatever layout you like.
Gotcha.
Anyway, so let's talk about like the gameplay, or maybe the gameplay of the popular games right now, because that's probably what most people experience today. Because the genre is still very, I think, pretty niche. It's became a bit kind of esport recently, but it's nothing compared to stuff like League of Legends, Dota, StarCraft 2. Maybe you can squeeze in 10 games in between, and yeah, you can win some money, but you need to be really, really good. And so if you are just good, then you probably won't see much money by playing fighting games.
Yeah.
And so today, the big fighting games are probably Street Fighter 5, Tekken 7, Guilty Gear Xrd is really big right now as well. Blaze Blue, and then yeah, you have the King of Fighters in pretty much every country. It's kind of like it's really big in Mexico and China and Japan, but other countries also have a scene. So I would guess it's kind of the global player, because it's not very regional. And that's, well, you have Marvel vs. Capcom, but Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite sold pretty bad. So maybe I would leave it out for now. Next year, you probably have Dragon Ball Fighter Z that's going to get really big. And like I named you 7 games or 7 game series, and they play so differently compared to each other. Like obviously Tekken 7 and compared to Street Fighter 5 is 3D. You can move around in a 3D environment, so you can step into the foreground or in the background to evade attacks, which and that's called a 3D fighting game, because you move in a 3D environment, while Street Fighter is a 2D fighting game, or like Guilty Gear, Blaze Blue, King of Fighters, Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite. They are all 2D fighting games, and the gameplay is very different. Like in Street Fighter or in 2D fighting games, if you're close to the opponent, you don't have the option of like evading an attack by going into the background. So if the game doesn't have a mechanic for you to kind of dodge an attack, you need to block it. If the opponent does an attack and you cannot counter it, then you need to block, and that's the only option, kind of. And but in Tekken, you could just say, "Oh, he's spamming that one strong attack. I just sidestep into the background and then punish him for trying to hit me, but he whiffed his attack, and I can punish now."
Mm-hmm.
So that's something that sets 3D and 2D games, 2D fighting games apart. And then, but what they have in common is that a lot of players say fighting games are about taking turns. So that means, for example, if I press an attack button and it's positive on block, which means I keep an advantage. Then I keep my turn, kind of, or the opponent needs to take a big risk to stop me from taking my turn. So, for example, I press that attack and I get an advantage, and then I can walk up and throw because the opponent is scared of me pressing another button. Mm-hmm. So, because I know, he won't press a button because I have the advantage. So I don't have to fear an attack. But he is probably also expecting me to press another attack to catch him if he does something. So you can just walk up and throw and make him press a button in the next time you're in that same situation. And that's kind of the same for 2D and 3D games. Because, for example, in Tekken, if the opponent has a frame advantage, then maybe the advantage is so big that you cannot, if you try to step to the side, like into the background or foreground, you still get hit because you could not move the required distance to evade the attack. Mm-hmm. I guess you understand what I'm trying to say, right?
Kind of. You said.
Yeah. Go on. Sorry.
Sorry. Actually, can you just repeat? I kind of missed. I missed a bit of it. But yeah, I understand you were talking about like going in 3D to like evade attacks, right? It's like if a guy overcommits, then you're able to punish him and stuff like that. But what was the latest concept you said?
It's pretty much about frame advantage and disadvantage in fighting games. Well, pretty much all fighting games run at 60 FPS, so 60 frames per second. Yeah. So let's say if you have an attack, and let's say you have a light punch, and light punch has 3 frames of startup. Then it's active for 2 frames, so that means it has a hitbox where it hits the opponent for 2 frames only, and then it recovers for 5. So if you, for example, have a punch animation, you have the arm moving forward. That's the startup. When the punch is at the peak, then you have a hitbox where only at that point it starts hitting the opponent, or where it can hit the opponent.
Yeah.
And then you pull back the arm, and that's the recovery animation. And that's pretty much how all attacks in fighting games work. Of course, you talked about combos, and that's canceling one attack into another attack.
Yeah.
Or you can also do something like linking, which means linking is when you do an attack and you have the whole animation play through. So you have startup, active, and recovery, and then you can press another attack, and it still hits as a combo. So your opponent could not block the next attack. It's not possible because he was still in hit stun. So there are so many terms. Maybe it's like hit stun or block stun is the state that you are in when getting hit by an attack or blocking an attack.
Yeah, I got
and if you block, then you can act much more earlier than getting hit. That's the reason why combos work. Because if you get hit, then you are in a hit stun state where you are open for other attacks, and that's longer than the block, the block state.
Yeah.
You have some games where, for example, you can kind of combo on block, where even if you stop holding back to block, in most fighting games it's holding back to block an attack. But if you press attacks all the time and you do it really quickly, and the opponent does not leave the block animation because he's getting hit repeatedly, then even if he presses forward, he keeps blocking because he never leaves the block animation because of the block stun. It's complicated. It's different from game to game, and so
essentially you have to practice like knowing like how long each one of the like disables is, or like stuns, as you said, right?
Yeah, exactly. So it's a lot about, maybe it's a lot about math or knowing like all the small details in a game. In fighting games you have strong and weak characters, but what makes them stronger or weaker can be very different from character to character. Like one character is just really fast, so it's difficult to interrupt him, which means, for example, that character's attacks have a very quick startup. So he can press buttons and they hit very early or very quickly. So that character can just make you kind of play his game style and push it onto you, where you have to respect what he's doing. But then you have characters that might not be very fast, but they do a lot of damage. So they only hit you twice in a match or twice in a round, and then you lost. And so it's always what kind of developers try to do is keep a balance where they implement different characters. If you have a grappling character, so it's all about throwing the opponent, and those are kind of slow in most games. They are like the beefy guys, the bulky guys that do a lot of damage, but are pretty slow, so they have to kind of inch their way in on the opponent, and the opponent is trying to keep them out. And then you have, let's say, ninja character, and well, most people expect ninjas to be very fast. So, but they are kind of not skinny. but let's say fragile. They are fast but fragile. So that's kind of the complete opposite of the grappling character. They are fast, but if they get hit, they take more damage than all other characters in a lot of games. And so like the ninja character needs to hit 5 times because he's fast, but does just average damage.
Okay.
But the grappler is slow, but does a ton of damage. And even that can be balanced, where you say, well, the ninja is faster. Like the grappler doesn't get his turn, so he cannot kind of get in. But if it's well designed, then the grappler can still has an option to fight back, and so that's pretty much what playing a fighting game is about. Knowing your strengths and your weaknesses, and knowing the opponent's character and that character's strengths and weaknesses, and pretty much exploiting it if possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you could compare it to like, for example, in Counter-Strike, you have weapons that shoot fast but do, let's say, 20 damage, and then you have the AWP that one-shots you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of like the ninja versus grappler matchup. Because like the AWP hits you, and then you're done for.
Yeah.
While you need to hit multiple times. But if you move well, and the opponent cannot predict your movement, then you can still win, because if the AWP shot misses, then you won, kind of, because you're in that other guy's face. And it's the same in fighting games. That's like another German fighting game player told me playing Dota 2, for example, is like playing fighting games.
Yeah.
It's about reading the opponent, reading the situation, and knowing what you can do, and to do it at the correct timing. So that, like, you also have spacing. You don't want to get too close to some heroes. You don't want to get too far away from some heroes.
Mm-hmm.
And you want to maybe keep the enemy hero in the range of your ability. So if your teammate comes in, you can hit him immediately with the ability. And that's the same in fighting games, where you move in and out of the attack range of the opponent to bait him to do something.
Yeah.
Where you go into his range, and you know, okay, he could press, let's say, his hard kick. He could press hard kick and hit me, but I'm at the tip of that range. So you move in, and then the opponent thinks, yeah, I can press that button now. Mm-hmm. But then you move back, and he whiffs his attack, and then you can punish him for doing something. Maybe you have a fireball that's fast enough, so like a projectile that you can throw out and hit him, or maybe you can just press your hard kick and hit him in his recovery phase of his attack. And that's pretty much that's pretty much fighting games in a nutshell. Like that's called the neutral, where you want to get an advantage by doing your own action, or having the opponent do an action that's unfavorable for him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And in this case, it's completely not hitting you.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And no matter what fighting game it is, like Street Fighter V is like the slow. Some people say neutral, heavy fighting game, and then you have games like Guilty Gear or Blaze Blue that are some people call them anime style because characters have these superhuman powers where they can shoot like slow traveling ground projectiles that are actually like explosions or really huge electric projectiles, and like they can shoot rockets and stuff, things that you might not see in the Street Fighter. So they are more over the top.
Yeah.
And like the game speed is also much faster, and the combos are longer compared to Street Fighter V, and so even on like the opponent needs to block more attacks, but you have more options as well. Like you can, instead of just dashing on the ground, you can dash in the air. So you actually have air mobility where it's not just jumping forward or backward, but also you can do a rapid air dash forward or backward to get in quickly or get out quickly out of situations. And all of that is still like it's different than the very basic fighting game, but it's just another level of reading the situation on top, kind of, or where you have more options. Maybe let's say it's like playing chess and then having a chess with different pieces that have better abilities or stuff like that. Yeah. Yeah, so that's pretty much fighting games. You start the round, you play the neutral, you try to get an advantage, then you try to capitalize on the advantage if you hit the opponent by doing a combo or setting something up. So like setting up an advantageous situation for you, and you do that until the round ends. So, but you cannot always do the same stuff, as you get very predictable. So the difficult thing is, like you said, the basics is like the basics are knowing your combos and your attacks, but like the advanced knowledge is knowing when to use it and not maybe not pressing the same combo all the time. So maybe you do a combo that does the maximum damage, but the opponent is on the other side of the screen afterwards, and maybe your character has a combo that does a bit less damage, but the opponent's character is still right next to you, so you keep your turn. You don't need to play the neutral because he's next to you. You have the advantage, and that's something that that you need to kind of know when to do or what to do against the opponent, what he's weak at, let's say.
Okay. Yeah, that makes. I mean, it's interesting to hear it like simplified down, so you like know exactly what to do in a match.
Yeah, so that's pretty much it. There's so much information. Let's say if you have a game with 20 characters with different attacks, they have different frame data. So like the light punch is not the same light punch for all characters, and there's so much stuff you can study that you can, oof, it like fighting games seem very simple, but they are not. And I think we slowly move to the developer section in a moment.
Mm-hmm.
But from my experience, like I said, when you only had offline play where you didn't have net play, people thought they were the hot stuff. They beat their friends. They are like the best. And fighting games can make you think that, but the games can be so not difficult, but there's so much stuff to learn that it takes a lot of time and a lot of practice to be really good at them. You need to be able to play very controlled. The rounds are very short, so let's say you have 1.5 minutes per round. If you compare it to Dota, where a round can take like one match can take 60 minutes or 1.5 hours. I mean, if your hero dies, you're dead for a longer time than a fighting game round. So you have to adapt so quickly, and you need to react to so many small things that you pretty much cannot. You never stop learning. Like you, even if we both played the same character, you would play that character completely different to me. So if you are a tournament player and you really want to be prepared, then you also need to know, how I would need to know how you, Bilal, are playing that character, so I can actually counterplay you.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. Yeah. So and that's kind of frustrating for beginners. I saw a lot of people quit fighting games because they just got stomped by good players. If you play good against somebody that's better than you, there's no chance. You might win one round, but the other guy wins 200 matches in a row, and you might have not a single clue why you lost.
Yeah, if you think you're good and don't really know what you don't know, then like getting stomped is one of the most frustrating things ever in like any competitive game, I think.
Yeah, and that can happen easily in fighting games. And if to our listeners, if you like fighting games, then don't be like demotivated from that experience. Pretty much everyone has that experience, except if they are really talented, let's say, or they prepared themselves really well beforehand.
Yeah.
But that's kind of why people meet offline, to play against each other and then say, what you did right there, what could I have done? Like, should I press an attack? Should I try a throw? Do a super move? What can I do? Stuff like that. And that it's a lot about experience as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, that.
Yeah. So
if then let's move on to the developer part, and I guess do you want to start?
Sure. So I think like what I, from a non-fighting game developer, see as like the things that can affect the game most. And I've read some articles, like I've read about one guy who was making a fighting game in Unity, and he made a kind of framework for it, which is like sitting in the asset store somewhere. But I think for fighting games, like I guess I'll kind of like list off some things that like really impact, I guess, the gameplay. Like from a more technical standpoint, not like character design, but actually like collisions. So I'd say like the shapes and size of like colliders, for like each character, or projectiles or attacks, are really like going to affect the balance of the game. So when obviously a player will never see the hitboxes, but they estimate like how large they are based on experience. So like if you play with the collider's size, then that's going to affect how close a player can get to another one. For example, um, like if you were to do something like be in that neutral part that you were talking about, or if you want to bait attacks, or if you want to even land an attack, you need to like keep into account a collider if you're a player. So as a developer, it's something to keep in mind. Is no matter like if you change your collider's geometry, then that will affect how players play, and that also kind of goes with the range of these attacks. That's kind of also based on it. There are other methods than using a collider. I don't know exactly how every fighting game works, but maybe some use a raycast rather than a collider. So, like shooting a line in front of a player, like when he, like say, if you do a light punch, then a line might be shot that checks for another player's collision at a distance rather than a collider. But I think a collider is probably the preferable method that most people use. So yeah, like different methods of landing hits are another thing to keep in mind.
Some games use hit and hurt boxes, so you have something like a square around. So if you have your character standing, then that would be the hurt box. But if you do a punch, then you have the hit, the hit box like a square at the fist, where it hits the opponent, and only the fist hits. But other games, I think Street Fighter 4 did have attack like hit and hurt boxes. Did have hit and hurt boxes, but it was bound to the models. So
yeah,
if you hit like the leg with your model, then you hit.
I gotcha. Yeah. So I guess it's kind of like more realism versus just gameplay changes, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So those are all things that you need to keep in mind. There's also like where attacks will land like vertically. So we just said like, are the colliders realistic, or are they kind of just based on how the developer wants to balance it? And obviously you can choose that, but what's most important is controlling your. You want to have control over your ability to modify these technical details like colliders and range and stuff like that, to affect like gameplay, how you want to see gameplay kind of go through, rather than like just leaving it to, I guess, trial and error. Like so say you just change the collider by like, I don't know, some arbitrary amount each time you test until it feels good. You might not want to do that, and you might like get a sense of what it'll be like. So you can go either way. You can have a sense of, say, this many units is kind of making it balanced, or you can kind of toss in some units and see how it turns out in the end, like when you're testing the game. I think either method works, but ultimately if you can control, for me that would be the most effective. So that's another like method of developing you want to keep in mind. And I guess finally my last kind of, I guess, development thing to keep in mind is if you're developing a fighting game, then whenever there's a combo or a hit, then there's going to be a different animation for it. So you want to make sure that your animations actually look good, and you have the developer, or you have the artist or the money to pay an artist to actually make an animation for each one of the hits. And you want to keep in mind that you need to be ready if you're planning on changing the game at all. If you want to edit combos, you need to be ready to either get back your animator or be able to hire somebody who can make similar animations. So yeah, those are my main developer standpoints that I can think from the outside, having never developed one of these. So
yeah, I think I agree that it's very important that you can control how, for example, attacks work, like how they hit, or where you can hit the character, because you can make attacks too strong or too weak very easily, and like popular fighting game series often have updates or sequels. Just look at Street Fighter 2. It started with World Warriors, then Champion Edition, then Turbo, then Super Turbo. No, then Super, and then Super Turbo.
Mm-hmm.
So you had like 6 iterations until you had a final product, which was still very unbalanced in the end.
Yeah.
But today it's much easier to patch stuff. People don't like it if you patch it too quickly, though. So if you create a fighting game, then it should be playable to a point where, like, if you pick character A, you cannot just press hard punch, because hard punch hits people in the air and on the ground, and even if they are crouching, so it's like the best button. So you don't need anything else that button. Then the game is really boring to play, and everyone will pick character A because you just press one button and you win, kind of. And that's what you should avoid. Like when you create attacks, let's say if you have 6 buttons, so for example 3 kicks and 3 punches, then you need to think, okay, what do I want to do with the attacks?
Yeah.
Like light punch is a quick poke with short range. It's the fastest attack. Medium punch might be just a longer range poke. And then you have hard punch, which is maybe too slow in the neutral, but you want to press it for maximum damage. So if the other guy made a mistake, you just punish with that button. But if you want to have like longer range but slow attacks, then you use, let's say, the kick buttons. Or crouching hard punch is an anti-air. So if the other guy jumps in, I press crouching hard punch.
Yeah.
The other crouching buttons might suck against somebody jumping in. Things like that. And that's important. You want to think about what attacks do, how they work, and kind of how they work together with your character design. Like we talked about I talked about the ninja and the grappler character. So if you give the grappler character, if you keep the damage but make the attacks as fast as the ninja character attacks, then maybe that character is broken, like, and maybe doesn't fit that character, because why is that huge bulky guy so fast? Might not make sense. And so it's kind of also keeping like continuity in the game, and that also helps the player actually understand the game. For example, if all characters have the crouching hard punch as an anti-air, then it's easy to get into another character, like learning a different character.
Yeah.
And also concerning, you talked about animations, and concerning combos, you mostly use, so for example, you can press medium punch into a projectile, then you just cancel the animation before the recovery phase into the projectile animation. And for the other opponent being hit, most games have different states for being hit animations.
Yeah.
Like if they get hit in the leg, like a low hitting attack, then like the character might move the upper body forward, exactly, like looking at the leg. But if getting punched in the face, then the torso and head move back.
Yeah.
Like if you got punched in the face, so you have like 3 or 4 different states, or 3 or 4 different getting hit animations, and you just say, okay, medium punch, getting hit in the face animation, crouching medium punch, getting hit in the leg animation, or something like that.
Yeah.
So that way you don't have to animate every single hit. It just needs to kind of work with the animation that that is being played. Like if you press, let's say a leg sweep, or maybe a kick to the knee, then it would be kind of weird to have like the head move backwards really quickly, like being hit in the face, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's also something to pay attention to. Else, from a developer standpoint, I think you have a lot of material that you can look at compared to other games, like compare it with other games, what you're trying to do, how they did it, and so that way you might know, okay, that actually works, or that doesn't work, and I think fighting games, if you do a small title, it's actually possible. Like we were talking about MOBA games or sports games before, and we said, nah, MOBA, forget about it. that market is saturated.
Yeah.
But for fighting games, it's not like players don't say, yeah, I only love Street Fighter and fuck the rest. Okay, of course you have some players like that, but most players, if they like the character design or maybe the gameplay design, they give it a try. Mm-hmm. So that way, like the community worldwide is very passionate. So even as an unknown developer, it might actually make sense to develop a game. At least, let's say financially, it can make sense to do it. Maybe if your product is bad, I mean, if you have a bad product, no matter the genre, it probably won't sell. But if you go into the community and you communicate and you say, here guys, working on a fighting game, here's some examples, like some animations, and that's the basic game, like game design, it should look like that and play like that and stuff, then people get interested and you get feedback and they say, that other game did that, didn't work out that well, maybe you should do it this way, and maybe that works. So you can also get a lot of feedback very early on in development from the community.
Yeah, which actually reminds me, I wanted to mention that if you want to like balance a game, then I would definitely want to use some sort of analytic platform. So say if your game has internet capability, or maybe if you might want to have internet capability in just a test version, then like I'd say like Unity, for example, has a built-in analytic platform. So you could have analytics for which characters have the highest win rates, which characters, tend to land more hits like in battles. And once you have those kinds of analytics, then you can go and in depth and maybe talk with good players at certain characters and say, like, what do they think is making these win rates so high, or making it so much harder for other characters to hit them, stuff like that. So
the good thing about the fighting game community is that it's very accessible. So even like the really strong players, they like to give feedback. So if you give them the opportunity to play the game, if they play the game, then they actually tell you, that's good, that's bad. Yeah. So you can, no matter who it is, you can get some feedback. So it's not like, that's some godlike deity that you cannot touch. That's pretty much not the case in fighting games. Also, last point is, if you want to develop a fighting game, think about the netcode. That's very important. Maybe even before starting developing the game.
Yeah.
That actually drives sales. I know people were interested about some fighting games, and then they didn't have any net play at all, or the netcode. Like 5 people bought the game and played online, and they said, "Yeah, netcode is shit. You cannot play online. It's impossible." And then people read that as in a review or as feedback in some forum.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, tough luck. Like the dude that lives in a small town and is on his own, he would say, "Yeah, why should I buy the game if I can spend maybe $30 on a different fighting game and that has good netcode, where I can actually play people online?" And that's also become very important recently. So yeah,
and you won't get away with like bad netcode or some faulty feature of the game that just makes it hard to play, because I mean that will be at the top of Steam reviews, for example, or whatever reviews there might be for consoles, etc.
Yeah. Also, because the genre is not as huge as, let's say, MOBA or sport games, you won't have hundreds or thousands of players online all day to play matches. So if people like those hundreds of people that might play it online, you want them to be actually able to play online.
Yeah.
So like if it, as an indie developer, you will be niche. So let's say you have maybe 10 players in Germany that are motivated to play.
Yeah.
And then you have like 10 French players and 5 players in the Netherlands. But you won't have all Germans online at the same time.
Yeah.
And so they might need to play against the French player or the Dutch player. And yeah, maybe it works with the German players, but it doesn't work against any other country. Then it's a very frustrating experience, because you always need to be very picky. You need to say just Germans, and you kind of need to set a date to play with people instead of just hitting the search game.
Yeah.
That can be very frustrating. Yeah, so I guess that's what's pretty much important about development. Try to keep the game balanced, have a good netcode, have an interesting setting. Don't go with karate dudes all the way. That's probably too boring today. Yeah, so guess we don't have much time to talk, or any time to talk about examples. So I would just recommend take a look at some match videos for the popular games, maybe some indie games. I mentioned Street Fighter. You can take a look at Street Fighter 2 to 5, how they changed. Guilty Gear series, BlazBlue series, Tekken. Tekken also changed a lot over the years. King of Fighters started in 94, had yearly releases until 2003, also changed every year. So every King of Fighters game is different. And there's a lot to watch that way. And I would also recommend taking a look at more smaller niche games, maybe, or that started as indie games, like Melty Blood. A recent game is Punch Planet. I really like that game. Maybe stuff like Zango, Guardians, Chaos Generation, Skullgirls. Skullgirls is probably the best example for an American fighting game. Very well made. Well, in Japan, I guess stuff like Koihime Embu is really good. Well, Melty Blood is also Japanese. Started as an indie game. Else, Arcana Heart series also started as a pretty small dev studio. So yeah, stuff like that. There are so many games to take a look at. So yeah, just check out the mainstream stuff and some indie games, how they do it, and then I think you should be good to go.
Yeah.
Do you have any final comments or questions, Bilal?
That's it from me.
Okay, then just as a hint, there is a lot of information concerning fighting games, how to play them, like wikis you can read, where you have explanations of all the terminology and stuff. So if you are interested in fighting games, then just check out like the lingo wikis, and yeah, then you get a better understanding, I think, already, and that's pretty much it. I hope I could explain fighting games simple enough. It's very difficult to do so. If you have any questions, then feel free to comment under the video, or you can write a tweet at NFB Sinju. Yeah, then I will reply to you.
Okay.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. Episode 19 concerning fighting games, and so then next week we have our next anniversary, 20th. Wow, time passes too quickly. So I hope you tune in again next week. Again, Bilal and I, the both of us. And yeah, thanks for tuning in, and see you next week. Bye bye.
Bye bye.